In Berkely, California, a group of Jews demonstrate against a lying billboard that spread the falsehood that the law school there was discriminating against Jews.
We need to understand as activists, as feminists, is that material conditions always matter and that everybody has a right to self-defense.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to the Struggle Video News. Always nice to start off with something positive. Here, the African Union throws out the Israeli Observer from their proceedings after decades of persecution of African refugees who had asked for help from the Zionist state. In Berkely, California, a group of Jews demonstrate against a lying billboard that spread the falsehood that the law school there was discriminating against Jews. The lie was part of a Zionist tactic. Another bit of good news: an appeals court in Germany threw out a conviction against a Jewish man who stood with Palestinians on Nakba Day 2022. Hopefully, it will be a precedent against other convictions for similar acts. A follow-up on last week's coverage of the violent attack on activist Issa Amro. The journalist who he was guiding around Hebron, Lawrence Wright, tweeted a tribute to the Belgian woman, Barbara Debuchelera, who videoed the assault. Tweeting this week, Amro showed how the Palestinian Authority used trucks to block a march of striking Palestinian teachers. You may have noticed that on last week's program, Omar Shaker of Human Rights Watch claimed that 27 Israeli groups said that Israel was practicing apartheid. That was news to me, so I looked it up. And sure enough, groups from B'Tselem to the Public Committee Against Torture issued a statement that said, in part, the occupation and apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territories have made Jewish supremacy the de facto law of the land. This new government seeks to make it official policy. So the next time someone says that it's anti-Semitic to say that Israel is practicing apartheid, ask them if all these groups, Israeli groups, are anti-Semitic. And from a Jewish man in Germany who tweets under the name Tendar pictures at a carnival in Germany. And he provided video of a march of people he called Nazis in a town in Germany, carrying German and Russian flags, being protested by appropriate circus music. One year after Putin's invasion of Ukraine, we start with photos from a farce. In Washington, the libertarians and other right-wingers, along with some naive pacifists, held a Rage Against the War Machine rally, all gathering in the holy cause of keeping weapons away from Ukrainians. It was led by a collection of free market capitalism worshippers, members of the LaRoucheite cult, employees of Russia Today, and pro-Assad politicians. Flags of Putin's Russia and an actual flag of the Soviet Union were at times behind the podium. Here, two people walk around with the Z symbol. The Z stands for support of Russia's conquest war. Here's a sign, Ukraine out of Donbass. That's like saying U.S. out of New England. And at least one counter-protester. Hooray for him. There are maybe 1,000 people at this rally at its peak, though they managed only a couple hundred for their March of Rage. All in all, a pretty small turnout. As a point of comparison, in 2003, after the U.S. invaded Iraq, we managed to get 500,000 marching in New York City. Some of the so-called left anti-imperialists, who I call Abels, authoritarian bootlickers, staged their own rally in San Francisco. 70 to 100 people took part. A rally in D.C. on Saturday the 25th for Ukraine in Washington. Now, Ukrainian mine worker leader Yuri Samoilov, he recorded this appeal to workers around the world in December.
Доброго всем дня. Меня зовут Юрий Самойлов. Я возглавляю независимый профсоюз горняков Украины в городе Кривом Роге. Я обращаюсь к рабочим всего мира, разных стран, разных профессий, к различным рабочим организациям, профсоюзам, общественным организациям с такой просьбой. Уже 9 месяцев идет война империалистической России против украинского народа. Конкретно наша организация послала на фронт несколько сотен человек, членов нашего профсоюза, как мужчин, так и женщин. Сейчас очень тяжелая ситуация с теплом, с светом, водой. Наступила зима, температура ниже нуля. Особенно страдают наши дети и наши старики. Я хотел бы попросить вас, чем можете, помогите нам. Все равно победа будет за нами, но с вашей помощью она будет с меньшей для нас потерей.
Samoilov is president of the Kryvyi Rih city branch of the Independent Miners Trade Union of Ukraine. Note, he said that his union sent hundreds of workers to the front lines at the start of the Russian invasion. He'll be speaking by way of Zoom at a solidarity fundraiser for the union at the New Haven Library at 2 o'clock on Saturday, February 25th. We'll bring you sections of a recent forum between Iranian and Ukrainian feminists. Frieda Afary, a Iranian-American, was the moderator. We'll hear from two Ukrainians who are presently in Western Europe.
Hello, my name is Frieda Afary. I am an Iranian-American librarian, translator, and author of Socialist Feminism: A New Approach. I would like to welcome you to this bilingual Zamane dialogue between Ukrainian and Iranian feminists. Now let's have a conversation with two Ukrainian feminists and find out how we can develop solidarity between the struggles of the people of Iran and Ukraine, and especially the women's struggles. Yulia Yurchenko is a senior lecturer and researcher in political economy at the University of Greenwich in the United Kingdom. Her research focuses on state, society, capital complexes, and transnational class formation, and the political economy of post-Soviet countries. She's the author of Ukraine and the Empire of Capital, From Marketization to Armed Conflict, published by Pluto Press in 2018. And she's also an editor for Capital and Class, among other journals. Oksana Dutchak is co-editor of the Ukrainian Shtilner or Commons Journal. She holds a PhD in social sciences and is currently continuing her academic work within the Berliner Institut für empirische Integrations- und Migrationsforschung. Her research interests include protest, workers' protest, gender inequality, social reproduction, care labor, Marxism, Marxist feminism. Oksana is devoted to engaged and public research, which contributes to public discussion and policies, trying to give voice to workers and other structurally underprivileged groups. Currently, she is a refugee in Germany with 2 kids and a dog. Almost a year has passed since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. During this time, the Russian army has killed tens of thousands of Ukrainians and has caused the displacement of millions out of a population of 44 million, many of whom have become refugees. Mass murder and systematic rapes have been a major part of this invasion. What has been the role of women in the popular resistance of Ukrainians against Russia's invasion? What has been the role of feminists and sexual minorities in this resistance? How would you evaluate the global feminist solidarity, and what have been some barriers in this solidarity? Oksana, would you like to start?
Thank you, Frieda. I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for organizing this important talk. I think we sometimes are too deep into our own problems and challenges, and it's important to have a look from the outside and try to pull the discussion further, which is extremely important, I think. I will start probably with more general picture that all of us understand and saw how the Russian invasion was campaigned not only by the very genocidal discourse on the side of Russian government, but also with a very patriarchal discourse, including presenting Ukraine like a female which should be submitted to the power of the more mighty country, meaning Russia. So in the end, it led also to resistance, not only in terms of national liberation struggle, but also the anti-patriarchal component of the struggle is important, and anti-conservative component of the struggle is important. Because we should understand and we should remember that when we are speaking about the Russian society and Russian regime, we are speaking about a very patriarchal regime. We should remember that, for example, domestic violence is decriminalized in Russia, and for example, that LGBT rights are very under heavy constraints in Russia, including like recently bans on different publications or any art pieces which represent how they frame it, which propagate LGBT. So in the end, I would say that the response of Ukrainian feminists and LGBT community, including organizations, groups, individuals, activists, was quite obvious, and it was not different from the response from the majority of the society, and it was about struggle against Russian invasion, struggle for self-determination of Ukrainian society, and struggle against all this very patriarchal, very conservative trend trends which we have been observing in Russia and which we don't want to see in Ukraine. I think we can start translating here and then I will continue.
That's a good spot. اکسانا میگوید که حمله نظامی روسیه به اوکراین هم مبتنی بر یک گفتمان معطوف به نسل کشی بود، یعنی کشتن، از بین بردن نسل اوکراینی ها، و هم مبتنی بر یک گفتمان بسیار مرد سالار و از این رو باعث شد که در اوکراین ما شاهد هم یه مبارزه برای رهایی ملی باشیم و هم یه مبارزه‌ای که بعد خیلی قوی ضد مرد سالاری داره. و وقتی که ما در مورد جامعه روسیه صحبت میکنیم باید در نظر بگیریم که روسیه جامعه بسیار مرد سالاریه که در اون خشونت خانگی از خشونت خانگی جرم زدایی شده و حمله به دگرباشان جنسی بسیار متداوله، حملات بسیار خشونتبار به دگرباشان جنسی و از این رو پاسخ فمینیست های اوکراینی و دگرباشان جنسی اوکراینی هم بعد از حمله نظامی روسیه به اوکراین بسیار مدافع مقاومت هماهنگ با بقیه مردم کشور بود و بنابراین هیچ اختلاف نظری در این زمینه وجود نداشت که باید علیه این حمله نظامی جنگید و جلوی این پیشرفت نیروهای ارتش روسیه رو گرفت، هم از لحاظ حق خودمختاری و استقلال اوکراینی ها و هم از لحاظ مبارزه با مرد سالاری. Thank you, Oksana. Please move on.
Further, I will go to the participation of women, feminists, LGBT community in Ukrainian resistance. And of course, it takes a very multiple shapes, starting from one of the most probably widely discussed in terms of participation of women in military service and in army and in armed resistance, which is of course important, but there are also a lot of things which are maybe not that noticeable, but also still important. So women and feminists, including feminists and LGBT community organizations and groups, are also very actively involved in all the various kind of volunteering and humanitarian relief, including like providing, for example, LGBT community, LGBT organizations were providing shelters for LGBT people who were living the dangerous territories and trying to seek safety. They were assisting them in inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine and so on. Also organization of evacuation and providing people with a very basic humanitarian support, like including food, hygienic products, and so on. Also, women and feminists and LGBT community are very active in participating in different tasks, very multiple tasks, which are needed both for military resistance, including like technical things like creating different, we call it like masking nets, so nets which are needed for to cover and to hide military cars and different military machinery and so on, or providing frontline with special candles which can both provide light and heating in winter, and so on. Also, what is also important, like in Ukrainian society, as in many other society, the frontline workers or key workers, they are very much feminized labor force, like including, for example, healthcare sector. So their role in the context of war, of destruction of wounded people, and providing support, healthcare for these wounded people is also very prominent. And this, like healthcare workers, for example, they are predominantly women. Also, for those who are, especially for those who are outside, but also inside, an important part of involvement is raising political issues and like giving, raising the voice of Ukrainian society and participating in different spaces and in different forms to voice the resistance, to give the voice to it, and to campaign for different issues and against different challenges, which are very important now. For example, groups I am related to, progressive groups, they are campaigning for cancellation of Ukrainian debt because in the context of war, economic crisis, of course, this debt is impossible to pay, and being problematic in itself. Now it's like the context is that this issue is even more pressing, the issue of debt cancellation.
Question, go ahead, please.
I wanted to add a couple of words on where solidarity comes from and what the challenges are and what some of the things that we need to be doing about it are. So we've seen with some of these letters that you mentioned at the beginning that some of those global feminist solidarity expressions indeed reproduced imperial gaze problems, and were speaking for Ukrainian people, even though that's not what Ukrainian people wanted, that's not what Ukrainian women wanted. And those narratives and letters were rather abstract and deaf to Ukrainian struggle, projecting own agendas and vacuous pacifist calls. Because what we need to understand as activists, as feminists, is that material conditions always matter, and that everybody has a right to self-defense. And Ukrainian and Russian feminists have been united on it, as Oksana already said. Support, international solidarity has been mixed indeed. And we have seen in Eastern European groups, for example, more solidarity, and in Syrian and Iranian feminists, more solidarity than in some West European and North American countries. But again, the terrain is uneven. But we've seen a lot of support helping women with childcare and housing and access to abortion, especially in places like Poland, for example, where it's very difficult. We've seen support with getting counseling and housing, and very often that support came from average women who do not associate with any movements, and who do not reside, let alone those who reside in powers, in the ivory towers of academia, who sometimes, it seems to me, worry more about their image and egos and the sanctity of their theories, rather than material needs of sisters around the world. So average women were coordinating, gathering food and clothes, home abortion kits, providing free therapy, helping fill the documents for refugees, helping them with housing, helping them with childcare, providing free language classes. All of those things came from those who sometimes won't even call themselves feminists. And that makes us wonder about the divide of academic and mainstream feminist discourses in some Western countries, and the material needs of women, children, those vulnerable LGBTQI groups around the world, and the future of feminist thought and feminist activism, and how important it is to center the needs of those suffering before somebody's analytical needs or academic egos. I'll bring one example here. There's been a rapid rise in human trafficking with the beginning of this war, and a lot of women and children ended up being prostituted around Europe, and some of them fell through the cracks, and it will be a long time till we find any trace of them. And especially when they end up in countries with legalized sex trade, and countries where social protections are also needed, the ability of campaigners to support victims of trafficking, to their ability to seek justice and prosecution of those who perpetrate trafficking, are watered down. And of course, the liberal arguments about choice are absolutely redundant here. And it also, there are material conditions of people running away from the war with limited needs, not having enough protections, being exploited, that basically expose the inability of certain systems to safeguard, protect, and prosecute those who are exploiting those vulnerable people. That is also something that I think brings up the gaps of intersectional critique and lack of intersectional critique of the situations where power disbalances, economic, legal, and otherwise, are rife. There are a lot of barriers that exist to build solidarity of better to do women and feminists, overall feminist groups and academics. And some of those barriers are specifically in that lack of materialist intersectional critique of patriarchal, racialized, ecocidal capitalism. And thus the meaning of solidaristic vision is lacking as well if you do not understand the power imbalances and the meaninglessness of choice in a situation of dire economic need. And from that, with the lack of that critique, there is a lack of understanding of material needs and rather primacy of vacuous academic thinking. We see that there is a lack of understanding of where those needs are and lack of program for help, while also unwillingness to hear those who are asking for help. So I think decolonization of vision and prioritization, the voices and the needs of those who are most vulnerable is what needs to happen for solidarities to be built. Thank you.
That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle Video News.